Hello viewers, and welcome yet again to another episode of Dinner Guide. I'm your host Chef Andy, and today we are going to be working on something simple yet also unique. I'm going to be showing you a very simple take on a beef curry. I'm also going to show you how to make some homemade chili, but before we get that far, I'll begin by introducing the ingredients before us. So from the very front, I've got some garlic powder, about 3 tablespoons of sugar and 1 teaspoon of paprika powder. You will also require 2 teaspoons of dried oregano, about 1 tablespoon of coconut cream, and 1 teaspoon of nutmeg. You'll also require a few roots of ginger and some apple cider vinegar, about a tablespoon of that, 1 medium-sized onion, 2 teaspoons of curry powder, and 1 tablespoon of tomato paste. You'll also require a 1/4 cup of basmati rice, some fresh coriander, and 2 large tomatoes. You'll also require a handful of some bullet chilies, about 100 grams of some cubed beef, some peppercorns to crush, some oil to cook with, some salt to season, and last but not least, some water to aid you in cooking your rice. We are going to take a short break now, but when we come back, you will be able to see how all these beautiful ingredients will translate into a very, very simple and beautiful dish. So please don't touch that dial. We'll see you in a little while. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We are going to start this very simple beef curry with a very, very simple process. But before we do so, we are going to begin by adding some water to our pot, and this will allow to come to the boil to aid us in steaming off our rice. So I'm adding about 1.5 cups of water. Now we're going to allow that to proceed to simmer on the side undisturbed. Now in the meantime, we're also going to be doing a very simple curry. So we're going to proceed to begin by heating a pan. And to that, you can proceed to add a tablespoon of some oil. Now to start off our curry, we're going to proceed to cook off our aromatics. So I'm going to start off by mincing some ginger root. Just using a grater attachment, proceed to grate your ginger. So you should be looking at about a whole teaspoon of some minced ginger for this recipe. You can proceed to reserve the rest. And just after detaching that bit of ginger still attached to your grater, proceed to add that to your hot pan. Proceed to also add your garlic powder, your curry powder, your nutmeg powder, and a small pinch of the paprika. And using a wooden spoon, proceed to fry your mixture. Your pan should actually smoke off just a little bit, but if the mixture goes a bit dry, proceed to add just a bit more oil just to be able to combine all your seasoning together. And off the heat, begin by first mixing ingredients into a consistent paste. Add your tomato paste and return to the heat. Add a small amount of water. That should aid you in breaking down that lump of the tomato paste. And it will also aid you in combining the flavors very, very quickly. And now once your curry paste begins to form into a nice consistent pasty consistency, we're going to just remove that from the pan very briefly and return our pan to the heat, proceeding to add a small amount of oil. This should aid you in browning your meat. Now at high heat, proceed to allow for your beef to begin to brown very, very quickly. And while that continues, we'll also proceed to chop up one whole tomato, making sure to take out the seeds. And you can proceed to discard. And very simply begin by julienning your tomato. And finish off by chopping into some smaller cubes. Right, so your tomatoes are done. Proceed to just toss your meat in your pan very briefly. Now your meat is about to rare now. We're going to allow that anywhere between 6 more minutes. In the meantime, I'm just going to finish also chopping up 1/2 onion. I'm using white onion for this recipe, but you can feel free to also use a red onion. Finish by chopping that off. Proceed to discard the roots. Now we're going to proceed to allow just for our meat to continue to brown a little more. But in the meantime, our water is already boiling at the end. So I'm going to proceed to season that with some salt and some oregano. Now we're going to proceed to pour in our rice and allow that to steam. Very important to mention as well, always give your rice a mix, and this will always aid in making sure that your rice does not cook into lumps. And now just to bring your attention back to the meat, your meat is now completely browned. Now we're going to proceed to return back the same mixture that we made a little earlier, which was the curry paste. And of course, very simply, proceed to add a little more water, aiding you to break that off completely. And you can now proceed to add your tomatoes and your onions. And proceed to mix through. Add a little more water, and that should aid in allowing for you to break down your tomatoes and cook off your meat. We are going to take a very short break as well. We're going to allow this to continue cooking, but we are not going to touch anything on the counter. We will see you in a very short while, where I'll proceed to show you what the beef curry looks like. We'll also have finished the rice, and we can also proceed to make that very simple homemade chili. So please don't touch that dial. We'll catch you in a very short while. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We've just been doing some very beautiful work with our beef curry, and it's still on the go. Our rice is also cooked on the side, so we're going to proceed to turn that off now. Now that it's done, and using a pasta spoon, I'm just going to proceed to fluff up the rice very quickly. And that should be now ready to serve. We'll just proceed to leave a lid on to make sure the rice doesn't dry out completely. And just to bring your attention back to the beef, this is now sizzling at very low heat. We're just going to turn this up. Now, as you can see, the liquid is now almost completely reduced. The consistency is also a little thicker. But we're going to proceed to finish this beautiful curry off by adding our coconut cream. Remember, always very necessary to have a bit of edge to your curry. The Oriental way would actually to have a bit of coconut cream in there. It really just brings out the naturality of a curry, and just similarly just resembles the many other beautiful curries we have out there. Right, once that's mixed through, we'll proceed to add some fresh coriander. Now just proceed to chop that very coarsely with a sharp knife. And you can proceed to add that to your pot or your pan. And proceed to mix through, making sure to drop your heat to the lowest possible level. And of course, very handy, always remember to season your dish. So add your salt at this stage. Mix through thoroughly. And now this is now about ready to serve, but we will allow it to continue to simmer very gently on the side here undisturbed, giving us a fresh pan that we're going to start off to make our chili sauce. So I'm going to be using a very simple, it's actually a very much similar recipe to the way it's done the French style. So it's a very simple technique. Begin your process by adding some water to a pan. So I'm going to be adding about a cupful. Now what you're going to do to this is proceed to begin by first chopping up some white onion, making sure to chop that as finely as possible. You can actually even take a little longer doing so. Now the reason why you need it very, very fine is for the fact that it is a chili sauce. Remember, you are looking for very fine consistency. And of course, as many of you would know, it's not very pleasant to have chunks of onion floating through your sauce. So very, very important to make sure to chop that as finely as possible before you begin. For those who may actually have quite a bit of a problem chopping by hand, if you do have a food processor, you can also chop your onions in there. It will actually give you a much more finer consistency than the one we have on stage. Right, so very simply proceed to add your onions to your water. And while you allow your water to come to the simmer, we'll also add our last bit of paprika powder, our 2 tablespoons of sugar, a generous pinch of salt, and you can now proceed to also chop up your tomato. So we're going to first begin by seeding the tomato, and this is basically very simple. It's just basically taking out that core with the seeds and setting those aside. Proceed to do the same for all 4 pieces. And we're just going to turn off our curry completely. Now this is now fully cooked. We're just going to allow that to marinate on the side there very, very shortly. Now come back to your tomatoes. We're going to proceed to julienne those. And next proceed to finish those by chopping them very, very small. Proceeding to do so to the very end. And you can proceed now to discard the seeds. You can push those to the side of your board. And we're now going to start chopping up our chili. So I'm going to be using about 3 or 4 pieces. Now move those onto your board and begin first by taking off the stems and discard those. Proceed next to chop them into half and proceed to chop very, very finely. At this stage we will incorporate the seeds, being that it is a chili sauce. I'm going to proceed to add our first chili. Actually, we'll cut those down to 2, being that the size of the pot is a little smaller. And just proceed to chop that finely. Now something also to mention, be sure not to attempt to chop chilies, especially if you've got bruises or cuts on your hands. Proceed also never to chop chilies and touch any particular openings, that being your sides of your mouth, sides of your ears, your eyes, or your nostrils. It will actually burn quite a little bit. And thirdly, to mention as well, if you're going to be making anything related to chili and you do have some small kids in the house that are not accustomed to eating anything hot, please remember that kids are not particularly house trained to consume chili. So you should actually be very wary to make sure that you don't cross-contaminate between your work surfaces or even with your utensils. It actually is very easy to actually have that little bit of chili sensation carried through your equipment and your utensils. So be sure to always finish by chopping your chilies. Be sure to at least sterilize the board or clean it with some vinegar. It will also take that heat from the board and make sure that you don't actually carry the heat along to many of your other ingredients that you may be using a little later. Right, so our chili sauce is already on the go. To that I will add some vinegar. And we're also going to proceed to add our tomatoes at this stage. Now we're just going to turn our heat to a little higher than before. And of course, very importantly, making sure to use a spoon to just proceed to mix that through. Remember, it always really gives an advantage to your pot when you mix your ingredients together, allows for a more even, consistent mix. Also allows for a beautiful even spreading out of temperature through your pan. Right, now we're going to finish off by adding our last and final ingredients to our chili, beginning by some chopped fresh coriander leaves. And of course, last but not least, proceed to also add some of your oregano. And you can now proceed to finally chop up the remaining bit of your ginger, making sure to go over it a few times with a sharp knife. And now what ginger does by adding this to your chili, it will actually allow for you to really get a beautiful lift of flavor. It will also balance the acidity and the citrusness of the sauce. And remember also, it just generally gives a very, very beautiful sharpness to any particular foods that you add it to, let alone adding some flavor. Just going to finish chopping that completely. Now you should actually allow for the liquid to continue simmering, or rather the mixture to continue simmering until the liquid is completely evaporated and your mixture is actually now broken down completely. Now just to finish off that chopped ginger, proceed to go over it about a fifth time. Now the reason why I'm not grating the ginger for this particular recipe is because I do actually want that bit of bite, especially when biting into the cooked ginger. It will also add a bit of texture to the sauce as well. As I mentioned, being that it's a rustic homemade chili, you do actually want a bit of a difference in texture. Now proceed to add in your ginger. And very importantly, add a small pinch of salt towards the end. You can also drizzle in about a teaspoon of oil. Now what happens is oil manages to really give a beautiful break between the water and the sharpness of the chilies. And crush in also some black peppercorns. And using your spoon, just proceed to mix as your liquid proceeds to reduce. And now we're just going to allow that to continue simmering towards its very end. But in the meantime, I'm just going to proceed to grab some plates, or rather my beautiful plate of choice, and we're going to proceed to begin by plating the rest of our dish. So very, very simply, using a spoon and a daring mold, we're going to very simply proceed to spoon out our rice. I'm just going to fluff that up with a spoon, and right by the side, proceed to scoop in your rice into your mold. Pressing very firmly over the top. Make sure that there's no air pockets in there. Just as soon as you get to the rim of your mold, proceed to stop and begin to just press all your contents into the ring, making sure to have a nice, beautiful, flat base right over the top when you do so. And you can proceed to lift. Now we're also going to proceed to dish up our curry. So I'm just going to mix that very, very quickly just to refresh the mixture. And using a ladle, I'm just going to proceed to scoop that mixture right around the rice. And as you can see from the color, nice, beautiful, rich color. The consistency should actually be almost thick. Very important to mention, you should not have any particular separated or individual fluids flowing in your pan at this stage. It should actually resemble almost a pasty consistency. Now just to go right around the sides of the plate. Simple as that. Now just to bring our attention back to our chili. At this stage we're just going to use our spoon to proceed to just give it that extra mix at the end. You can also tilt your pan. This will allow for your liquid to also evaporate a little faster. That should now almost completely be combined. Just remember not to reduce all of your liquid, because it will also allow for the chili to really mix really easily. So always reserve just a bit of liquid in your dish. And now just a very simple trick that I like to use to separate my liquid from the chili. Just very simply hold a sieve over the bowl that you may want to serve this in, or even a separate bowl on the side, and just scoop your chili into your sieve. About 4 tablespoons should do. Lift and allow for your chili to just drain the excess liquid. And you can proceed to scoop that into a separate dish on the side, and just proceed to do the same thing with the remaining bit of your mixture. And very handy to always mention as well, you may want to also allow for your chili to sit a little longer by preserving it in an airtight container. So one particular good jar that you may be able to find out there, or rather any particular jar that you may be able to find, will always do the trick. Just be sure to always begin by sterilizing your jar, which will just basically be a small technique. You just throw your jar into some boiling water, allow for the jar to completely sterilize, and then remove and dry. Proceed to also just pour your chili mixture into the jar, close it and make sure it sits tightly. And you can actually allow that to sit on your shelf anywhere between a day to 2 days, or even a week, to allow for the marinating of those flavors. And you can also now proceed to move that into cold storage, which would be your refrigerator. And any particular homemade chili should be able to make at least a month from the date. So also be very vigilant to make sure to mark the date, or rather mark the chili that you make with a date, just to make sure that you don't actually keep it beyond its time and then actually have a very different product all along. So now our curry is done, our rice is also done, and this beautiful chili is also done. So I'm just going to leave that on the side. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is my very simple take on beef curry with some steamed rice and some homemade chili. I hope you managed to depict something interesting from the show today, as opposed to many other shows that we've had in the previous sessions. And I also hope that you will actually take a chance and try out the recipe that we've presented today, Remember, you're not limited to sticking to only the ingredients we used. You can actually improvise with your own beautiful little additions. But please do remember to send us your feedback. If you're going to be making something as well, just take a picture, send it back to us. We always appreciate your feedback, and we also love to hear back from you and get something, or rather a little bit of knowledge of what you also get from the show. So I will also remind you to check out our Facebook page, leave your comments, inquiries, or any particular issues pertaining the show. Me and my directors and producers are always very much ready to hear back from you. But for now, I will bid you farewell, wishing you a lovely evening, and until the next episode of Dinner Guide, I will bid you farewell. See you soon, and God bless.